Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kevin, and today I'm making the Stardew Valley sign, which we see in the game's main menu. This is an iconic part of loading into the game, but shockingly, there weren't any great STLs for it. There were a few out there, but they were missing a lot of details, and I thought I might be able to do a little bit better. The first step in making this was finding a good reference image. I loaded up the game and took a screenshot. It was that simple. If you've watched the channel before, you probably know that for my daggers and other large props, I often have to edit together multiple images to get a single usable reference. But in this case, it was just that easy. I edited this down so I had a nice reference to use in Blender, but I made a bit of a mistake here, which I'll talk about in just a minute. I started with these boards which are in the background. Normally, I try to go for big and critical details first, but these were quick and easy to knock out. This brought me to something that I've struggled with on a number of projects, which is how to do a good job recreating wood grain. On my past Stardew projects, like making Leia's statue, I've crudely painted this on. I'm not thrilled with the final look, but I've gotten good feedback on it, so I may just be too critical. I recognize that the right way to do this is to sculpt the wood grain into the model itself. So after printing, I could go back with some dark washes and light dry brushing to add a lot of really realistic detail. I've never actually done that before, so that would probably take me a significant amount of time, and I wasn't sure how it would turn out. I decided to go with the less flashy but more reliable approach of just painting on these details. Next, I moved to the upper left-hand corner of the sign and started work on the frame. My plan was to mirror this piece, so it would also appear on the right as well as the bottom. This was a lot of tweaking with a subdivision surface modifier, but it wasn't a very technically complex piece to model. Remember earlier when I mentioned making a mistake with my reference image? This is when it became a problem. My reference image wasn't quite centered, which was an issue when I tried to mirror this. It wasn't a big issue, I just had to do some manual adjustments, but it was a really silly mistake to make. One of the smallest details, which I spent the most time on, was the rope on either side of the sign. Originally, I made these using a long path, and actually recreated the knots. I loved this, but there was a major issue with this approach. Doing it like this would create a small gap on either side of the rope, which I didn't think would print very well. I decided that a shape like this, with no gaps, would probably work better. I went through and redid the ropes with some cubes, which I rounded over using the subdivision surface modifier. I made the letters by tracing over my reference image with a plane, and then extruding it. These looked to be made up of different boards nailed on top of one another, so I extruded this into a few different layers to get that effect. I added some bolts to the different letters, and adjusted the heights based on the boards they were sitting on. One of the bolts on the upper A was sticking out a little more than I intended, which did become noticeable during painting. I went back in and adjusted the height on this before posting the files, so if you're making your own, you won't have to deal with this. For each of the letters, I creased the edges and applied a subdivision surface modifier. This wasn't really necessary for the letters made up of straight lines, like the L's and the T's, but the curvy letters like the S definitely needed it. I figured I'd paint the wood grain onto these letters, but there were a few areas showing damage and holes in the boards, so I decided to add those details. I added the leaves, which were just blocky outlines which I smoothed over using the subdivision surface modifier. One of the final parts of modeling was fixing the face orientations. These get swapped a lot if you're extruding planes, and it doesn't really matter much for the modeling as long as everything's consistent, but your slicer really won't like these. I printed this on my bamboo P1P using some black PTG. I taped this to a paint stick and then sprayed it with some automotive primer, which will fill small imperfections. I knew from the start this was going to be a pain to sand because of all the details on the surface. I wanted to see how much the automotive primer could do, but unfortunately I applied a second coat off camera that was a little too thick, so I did have to do a round of sanding to clean this up. After sanding, I applied a bit of wood filler to the roughest areas, which was mostly the leaves. Then I did another quick coat of primer before painting. When you break this down, this sign has 5 colors. There's the lightest yellow background, the orangish letters and frame, the grayish rope, the silver nails, and the green leaves. I decided to start with the yellowish background and then apply the orangish color to the frame and letters. Everything else is basically a trace detail. I did a base coat of the yellowish background, but I didn't add enough yellow, so this was just a flesh tone. I did better on my next coat, and I incorporated some folk art metallic paint to give it a bit of a shine, which I ended up doing for all of the colors I used. Then I tried to add wood grain, which did not go well. Normally I would apply some darker colors and then wipe them off, leaving some smudge marks which look kind of like wood grain. But this wasn't flat, so I couldn't smudge the paint on very effectively. I immediately hated this, and decided to paint over it with another uniform coat of the yellowish wood tone. Then I started painting in the orangish tones. My initial pass was focused on just the edges of the letters, which was going to be the most challenging and time-consuming part. That first painting session took me at least an hour. I ran out of time and paint on that original pass, so later on I came back to this and mixed a fresh batch. I applied a second coat of paint to the letters and started working on the frame. This was much faster, but still took a lot of time. I went in and added some grayish white to the ropes, which was fairly quick because these were relatively small details. After doing the ropes, I still had some leftover grayish paint, so I tried mixing in a little bit of yellow and touching up some of the spots around the letters that I had messed up on. I had hoped this would be a good match, but it really wasn't. So at this point, I knew I needed to do one final round of the background color to clean this up. Before that, I painted the leaves, which took me nearly half an hour. These were small details, but I really didn't want to get paint on the frame or the letters and have to go back and touch that up. I went in and carefully outlined the letters and the other details with my newly mixed background color, before coming back with a slightly bigger brush to fill in the larger areas. The final detail were these metal nails, where I dabbed on a little bit of metallic paint. I can pretty broadly divide my projects up into 2 categories. The first are things like the daggers, which I really enjoy making, but after I post these videos, they normally go in a box. The other category, which this sign falls into, is things that I really like and want to display around my home. To make that easy, I decided to put magnets in the back of this, so I could stick it on my fridge. I included some holes in the model for 10mm magnets, so I just had to pop out the supports. I used a bit of super glue and dropped these in. After 30 minutes, they were ready to go. I finished this off with a coat of clear matte sealer. I immediately wish I had attached this to a paint stick again, but I didn't think about it until I started spraying. If you've made it to this point in the video, I hope you'll take a moment to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you enjoy my work, you can even leave me a comment and let me know what I should make next. It helps the channel a lot and I really do appreciate it. So with that out of the way, here's the final result. It came out really nicely, and I'm very excited to put this up. I did make a few mistakes, which you should be able to easily avoid. First off, I should have spent $5 and gotten the right paint colors. For the orangish tone I was using on the letters and the frame, I was mixing orange, brown, white, and various metallic colors. It was more luck than skill getting the right shade, and I tossed quite a few that just turned into a muddy brown. Even if I still planned to mix in the metallic colors, I could have bought a single tube of paint that was very close to what I was going for and drastically simplified these mixtures. That would have made it way easier for me to come back and touch up my work. Second, I really didn't need these recessed details. I thought these were going to be a critical part of the wood texture I painted on, but they turned out to be kind of pointless. I do think someone with the right skills could do a really nice job painting on wood grain, but looking at my final results, I don't think it's needed. I actually went through and edited these pieces out before posting these files, so if you end up making your own, you won't have to contend with these. My third and final mistake was not having a better lighting setup when I was painting this. You might have noticed in the footage that there were a lot of shadows. That's because I had to rearrange this room and this desk went in a different spot, which has much worse lighting. When I was looking at the finished sign under better lighting, I realized I actually missed a section along this part of the frame, so it's a slightly different color. I know it's small and no one else is going to notice it, but every time I see this, I'm going to spot that. That would have been really easy to avoid if I had better lighting or had done a better job mixing these colors, so I didn't have those differences between coats. Overall, I'm still really happy with this and excited to put it up on my fridge. If you want to make your own, just check the video description down below. I'll have links to the files along with every product I used in today's video. I'll be back next month with another project, so until then.